Oh.
Mrs. Taylor,
Mrs. Payne?
Mr. Lee. This is my client, Mrs. Lee.
Hello.
So we're here today to try to find a fair divorce settlement held between Mr. Lee and Mrs. Lee, my client.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we'll reach a negotiation here, an agreement, so that we don't take this further to a trial. Do you have anything to say?
No, not at the moment. I have my clients once in this divorce proceedings, but I think, and Mrs. Lee, as she initiated this divorce, maybe she should go first.
We should go forward with the story of why the divorce comes to place. Mrs. Lee here is the CEO and founder of a fashion industry, which is based international wide, which you both know, I assume. And Mr. Lee here has been an employer of that firm for 2 years, while Mrs. Lee and Mr. Lee has been married for 5 years. They've been together for 8 since high school. Am I correct? Yes. The divorce was filed by Mrs. Lee, who found Mr. Lee here to be involved in extramarital sexual acts.
No.
Meaning that he performed adulterous acts, and this is why Mrs. Lee here is filing for divorce. Okay, so let's start. What we have here, what we're going to settle today, is the 3 houses.
Yes.
In Mrs. Lee possession, which is the house in Hong Kong, the house in New York, and the house in Paris. We there continue on to having the matter of the dog Chihuahua, which both hold so very dearly. Since the couple itself do not have childs of their own, this will be their child. They deeply love, and we have. What else do we have to negotiate today?
The money.
What money are you referring to?
The estate
money I should
of
have.
Mrs. Lee. The money Mr. Lee feels that he should have.
Yeah.
And
The
also,
estimate worth of the fashion company owned by Mrs. Lee.
and also including the 5% shares of the company Mr. Lee owns. We should discuss that also.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Do you have anything to add to this?
No, that is exactly what I've written that we need to discuss.
Also the cash, I think.
Yeah, the money.
Do you have anything to add, Mrs. Lee?
No, it is you who betrayed me, and then now you're asking me for money. So it's just not possible.
But it's not my duty, you know. It's not my mistake. It's your mistake. You're not a very good wife, and you give me a lot of pressure. Even though at home you just treat me as an employee, you know. This is your mistake.
I loved you since we are in high school, and now you betrayed me. You mess around with my models. So how can I forgive you?
But it's not my mistake. You should understand. I built the company with you.
No, the company is mine.
This is not going anywhere.
No.
Guys, Mrs. Lee, I advise you to put this later. Okay, so let's go right into the offer here. We're offering you 20 million of Mrs. Lee's hard-earned money, which she earned by herself while she founded the company, and we are offered. We feel that to make this a speedy process, we can offer you 10 million for the 5% shares that Mr. Lee owns.
I'm already very generous about this.
This is a very generous
so
offer.
mean.
This is not a generous offer. Mr. Lee feels that he helped Mrs. Lee found said company and therefore deserves a lot more than 20 million of a 1 billion estimate company.
We feel
It
that
is ridiculous.
it is not ridiculous because Mr. Lee here was the high majority of his duties to this company was spending its incomes, basically. Mr. Lee has done nothing for the company. He has been employed for 2 years of this company from Mrs. Lee's generous heart because he could not keep a job.
You have done nothing for the company.
He
I
was
have done
only
enough
an
for
employee
the
of the company.
company.
What you
Shut
do
up.
is just messing around with my models.
No, it's just the one thing you remember, but I do a lot of things you can't remember. You know,
He did not get fired from previous company.
Yeah.
He
No, I
gave
quit
up that job in order to work for his wife so he can see his wife once in a while because she is never there.
But for being an employee by name only, not by duty, for 2 years does not
By
incline him to
duty.
give any more of Mrs. Lee hard-earned money.
If she feels that he has done nothing, why is she giving him anything?
So to make this a speedy process, so we do not have to go to trial. I mean, we wanted to make this a speedy trial because we settle it here because we have incentive. I assume that Mr. Lee have any even bigger incentive, seeing that he has no money to take this legal actions, further legal action, to pay the lawyer, to pay the witness fees and legal expenses of the trial associated with his stress. And frankly, Mrs. Lee here isn't worried about the money, but she doesn't just have the time. She doesn't want to waste the time, so that's why we just want to make it a speedy process.
If you don't compromise in any sense, let's just see you in the court. I don't care.
I don't care too.
You have no money, Mr. Lee. You have to consider the fact that you do not have the money that Mrs. Lee
But
She has the money. He has the money
yeah.
that he's been working for. He doesn't not sit on
Let
nothing.
me remind you that
Mr.
I am
Lee's-
the CEO. I'm the CEO. I can fire you anytime. And think of your little model girlfriend. I can fire her also.
But we
Yeah,
don't
Mr.
care.
Lee, I'm inclined to remind you of the position Mrs. Lee stands for, and the fact of the matter is she does have very much influence in the fashion industry, in the model industry. So the fact is that if this would not be a fair stipulation, we will do the same to you. If you're not fair to us, Mrs. Lee won't be fair to you in matters of your now private life, apart from Mrs. Lee.
What
Just need
Mr.
to
Lee
call-
wants, maybe,
Yes.
demands from Mr. Lee's side of the matter is he is 50% involved in this relationship, in this marriage.
Mhm.
He should have 50% of what the estimate is, i.e. $500 million.
$500 million.
It's
Yeah.
not possible.
It's ridiculous.
It's very possible.
Even explain that Mr. Lee has not been 50% of this marriage. Mr. Lee has been 0% of this
No,
marriage.
he's been
seeing that
80% of this
he's
marriage because his wife was never there.
He's lived a majority. How could she be there when he's jet setting around Europe, partying his way through Europe? He has never been part of Mrs. Lee's.
Have you ever
Like-
cared about my feelings? No.
But you
Have
never
you
care
ever
about
taken,
my
taken
feelings.
care of me?
You're
no.
not a responsible wife in your home. You're,
Do you know why I need to work so hard? It's because you always just mess around and you cause so many troubles to our company. That's why I need to settle all the things for you.
But you-
That's
you
why I
only
need to
the
work for a
person
long
who
time.
is lack of
I advise you
experience.
to take this.
You know.
Let's go on to the next point.
Okay. Okay.
Then there's the matter of the three houses,
Yes.
in which we feel, especially since the Hong Kong house was an inheritance by Mrs. Lee's grandparents, feel that this belongs to her, including the house in New York, which she most definitely needs for her as she travels so much back and forth. It's part of her company, which she founded herself, and the house in Paris because all the fashion
Together with her
weeks.
husband.
All the fashion weeks are held there, and it's crucial for Mrs. Lee to have a house there too, from her convenience.
So your deal is none of the three houses.
We're willing to
are for
depart.
Mr. Lee.
No, we're willing to depart with our much beloved Chihuahua, which we deeply love, for the houses.
So the Chihuahua for all three houses.
Chihuahua is like our child, or Mrs. Lee and Mr. Lee's child.
Mr. Lee would very much like the Paris house.
No, it's not possible. Don't you know that I surely know that why you want the house, because you want to mess around with your French little girlfriend, but I won't let it go so easily. It's not so possible.
I must also add here that Mr. Lee should be glad that we're not doing this settlement in China, where adultery is a crime punishable by something less than getting money for something he never was a part of.
But he was a part of it. That's
Yeah.
why we're here.
I opened the market in
The
Paris.
only
should
thing
know.
you were part of, Mr. Lee, was signing your name to a marriage contract. Other than that, your role in this lifestyle or in this marriage has been zero.
equally to Mrs. Lee. The role in the marriage has been 0 on her part.
Going back to the financial assets, what the 10 millions for the 5% shares? Would you agree to that? Since this is a part of a company you do not like, you do not enjoy.
This
being
is
a part
way too low.
I
For
like the
what
company.
Mr.
No one
Lee-
can prove that I don't like the company. Just the
Or that
words
you-
of my wife.
You did
You
not
haven't
respect that
involved in
company since
Yes,
the
of course.
newspaper are printing your face with that French model all over the world. This is
It's my
disrespecting
private
to
fire.
the company.
You are
It's
ruining
not
the
business
image of
fire.
the company.
What?
You are ruining the image of our company.
No, you're ruining the image of a company. You're just very selfish.
As our time is
And
limited,
the
Mr. Lee, I
employer
apologize
hates
for interrupting. As our time is limited, I apologize for interrupting. Let's see how we could make this. Like, if we look at the joint accounts or the private accounts, if we look at the investments and bank investments accounts, we've seen that the majority of money coming into those accounts are from Mrs. Lee. Hardly 10% of that has come from Mr. Lee's account.
But there's an explanation for that. Mr. Lee is an employer in the company, and
Of
Mrs.
course,
Lee owns the
this
company.
is what I'm saying.
But our point of view is that Mr. Lee helped to found the company.
In
And
what
And
that's
way
has
did he
been a
help?
supporting
As an
power
employee
in
only.
10 years.
Listen, okay,
And
we're willing.
therefore has more right to the funds of the company than just an employee
No,
of the
we
company.
do not
He
believe
just
he
worked
has-
as
yeah.
an employee and he has earned his income. So it's a fair trade.
As we want to make it a speedy discussion
Process.
here, agreement stipulation, we feel that 1/2 of 1 billion is simply ridiculous.
Can you show some respect?
Yes?
Our absolute minimum money
Hmm?
wise is 1/4 billion.
1/4 billion.
Yeah.
And does that include the 5% shares in those money?
We don't.
Without
How much are you planning on selling the 5% to? Because we cannot leave without the 5% here.
I don't
Let's
know.
make
Well,
it-
like my company animal.
would it be a respectable compromise to add the 5%? You can buy the 5%.
For the
For
half a
1/4
billion.
million.
We
1/4
can
billion.
agree with that. We can agree with that.
Is that agreeable to you, Mr. Lee? We have an agreement on that part. Now back to the houses. Mr. Lee does not agree to the 3 houses for the Chihuahua, even though he loves the Chihuahua
Yeah.
like a child.
Mm-hmm.
The Paris house is still very, very important to Mr. Lee.
If you want to take the Paris house, then we cannot give you that much money. You need to compromise.
So you can see she's so cruel to the dog or child, you know, just care about the money and the house.
Yeah.
I've spoken now to Mrs. Lee, and we're willing to give you Paris if we can get the dog, the Chihuahua.
House and Paris house and Chihuahua.
I think we're at a standstill here.
Should I write down house in Paris here?
You. Mr. Lee has decided to agree
To the house
this.
in Paris.
House in Paris, and Mrs. Lee will have the Chihuahua.
So we've agreed to this upon this day that 1/4 billion gets to Mr. Lee. He has no shares in the company whatsoever. His share goes to 0. House in Paris, and Mrs. Lee gets the Chihuahua. Are we all agreed upon that?
I'm aware
Yes.
of that.
You may sign here, and we have reached an agreement. so much.
Thank you.
Bye,
I
Mr.
don't want
Lee.
to see you anymore.
Bye, Mrs. Lee.